This health care law, by raising taxes, imposing new mandates, and increasing uncertainty, is already destroying jobs in our country. It will continue to destroy jobs in America unless we do something about it.
Are we saying the health care bill is perfect? Of course not. The Republicans have to understand that the health care bill is not going to be repealed.
But there will be a vote to repeal Obamacare Wednesday in the House of Representatives. This comes on a day when the Congressional Budget Office sent the new Speaker, John Boehner, a letter in which it estimates if the repeal happens, quote, there probably will be an increase of the federal budget deficits over the next 7 years of a total of roughly $145 billion. Well, the new House Budget Committee Chairman, Paul Ryan, pushed back against that today, saying the Obamacare will increase the deficit by roughly $700 billion. Here's what he said. CBO has to score what you put in front of them. And if you put a bill in front of them that ignores the discretionary cost of the $115 billion you need to spend to run this new Obamacare program, that double counts the Medicare savings, that double counts the Class Act revenue, that double counts the Social Security revenue, that does not count the doc fix, you add all of that stuff up, net it out, we're talking about $701 billion hole deficit. So there's the response. We're back with the panel. First, let's start with health care. Charles.
Well, Ryan is, of course, absolutely right on those numbers. As a former CBO director, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, said today, it's garbage in and garbage out. CBO is honest. It doesn't play with the numbers, but it's required to work into its numbers exactly what the Congress gives it.
In other words, it's a calculator. You put in the stuff, it gives you the
And the Democrats are the ones who decided that the doc fix, which is over, I think it's $200 billion, would look bad in Obamacare. So what happened? They pulled it out, they put it in a separate bill, and of course there's no way to pay for it. And, of course, it reduces the liability in Obamacare. All of these gimmicks. The biggest gimmick of all is that the benefits don't kick in till 2014. The taxes start now, so you've got 10 years of revenue in, 60 years of expenditures out. Of course you're going to end up with a surplus.
Do you know how many panels we dealt with this issue, during the whole debate?
And how many people out there are snoozing every time I go through all of those details? But that's the only way to deal with it. You've got to look at how the numbers were cooked by the Democrats and how a CBO answer is not an objective answer if the numbers in were not objective.
So the question is, do Republicans then, did they ask the CBO to score a repeal and come back with the same numbers that they essentially had the Democrats put in?
Well, they would have to get the CBO to agree that there are different assumptions and to just the kinds of things that Paul Ryan was talking about if they expect the CBO to come up with something different. Otherwise, it's going to be the same thing. But I will say this, this is the trap I think Republicans have fallen into on this subject. They are on the defensive now. Now they're having to challenge CBO, and they've got the Democrats and Pelosi's office putting out statements talking about this is going to add, if it's repealed, $230 billion to the deficit over the first 10 years. Republicans are on the defensive, whereas previously they were on the offensive, even in terms of the way it's being handled.
The rules, how it's been rolled out.
Yeah, that's just going to be a majority vote, no amendments allowed. They're not making any compensation for the fact that there might be some added deficit.
Although House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, I asked him about that last night. He said, listen, we've had 2 years of hearings on this subject, and we had an election that dealt primarily with this subject, and the American people expect us to have this vote.
You know what I think?
I know, that's his answer.
Yeah, but I mean, in all honesty, if he was saying, let's have a discussion, let's have a debate because there are things here that need to be fixed, I wonder if the American people wouldn't react differently. The way it's being done now, I think, puts Democrats on the offensive and, again, puts Republicans in this defensive crouch.
Jonah.
Yeah, I'd say 3 things. First of all, part of the problem is that since everyone knows it can't finally pass, right, it's not going to become law.
Through the Democratic Senate or this Democratic president.
And get past the veto and all the rest. There's really no reason not to have a symbolic vote. The problem with the symbolic vote is instead of repeal and replace, you just get repeal. And you don't have the replace. And the Republicans need to have some other plan, because the status quo ante before Obamacare was pretty bad. The third point I would make, and I agree entirely with Juan about this, is that the problem is once you start having these deficit CBO arguments, you lose the forest for the trees, right? I mean, it is just crazy to talk about the idea that somehow a sweeping new entitlement that is going to add 30 million people to the healthcare rolls isn't going to cost a lot more money. And if you took the deficit thing out for just a second, no one disputes that it will cost a lot more money in spending and it will cost a lot more money in taxes. And that is the argument that Republicans need to be making, that this thing was a crazy expansion of government, and if the green eye shade guys with their pocket protectors and their calculators want to talk about CBO scoring, fine. But this thing needs to be repealed because it's bad for the economy.
But if the opposition is going to wave around a CBO report with a number on it, then what Republicans ought to do, or ought to have done, is ask the CBO to calculate the cost of health care reform under real assumptions, plug in the real assumptions and the real numbers, the doc fix included, et cetera, all this other stuff, 10 years of revenue against 10 years of income. So I don't have to say it again on the air, and a new number will come out of CBO, and it'll be a clean number, and it'll show a huge deficit.
See, we think our viewers like the weeds. We've been there many times. All right, that's it for the panel. But stay